Today we have a Ford Mondeo 2012 model. It's a 2 litre TDCi, the diesel engine, and it's got roughly 130,000 miles on the clock. Today, as part of the service, I'll be doing an engine oil and filter change. Now, the oil filter on this engine is not the easiest to get to. Just pull that off. That's just like a ball and socket arrangement. It's actually located right down under here. A little bit difficult to see. For the oil change, we're going to need a 21mm socket, spanner, whatever you've got to hand. That's a little bit unique, I guess. 27mm cut down step ring spanner to access the oil filter housing. They're a little bit tucked away on these. Couple of screwdrivers, one to get the oil filter element out, one to change the O-ring seal, and we've got 10mm. Obviously you can just use a ratchet, but I'll just put it on a gun, it's a bit quicker. And if you find the nylon fixings are worn, it's a good idea to have a cable tie and a pair of snips to hand, and I'll show you how we use that. Right, I'm going to start by removing the oil filter. So we've got a little tab here to push, lift that up, and that can get out of the way. Now, every oil and filter change I do, I like to loosen or take the cap off. When you're underneath draining the oil, it just lets air back into the engine. It drains out a bit smoother. Pull the dipstick up a bit as well. Right, to access this oil filter, yeah, they're not a very nice one. I've actually got a bolt of spanner which I've cut down just so you can fit in there. It's a shame there's not an access hole through here that you could put an extension bar down there and put a socket on it. Right, so hopefully this isn't too tight. Ah, there it goes. Few spots down there. Right, we'll take this over to the vise and change the oil filter. Right, so now I've got this done up in the vise, just makes things a bit easier. That should just pull out. That's it. And we've got an O-ring seal on here. Just need a little screwdriver to hook that out. Right, new oil filter. It's the same both ends, so it doesn't matter which way up it goes. It should just click on there. It's not a very snug fit actually. Yeah, definitely the right one. That's probably the difference between a genuine and aftermarket oil filter. You should be able to pick up an oil filter for under £10, an aftermarket one. As long as you take your registration number wherever you go, whoever you use, they'll be able to look up the relevant parts for you and probably offer you several different brands. And that's it. It was a little bit easier to do up than it was to undo. I think the old seal had probably, the O-ring had swollen up a little bit and made it tighter to unscrew. Always prefer to do the oil filter first because when you take the housing off, it lets air into there and there's just a bit of oil there which will then drain down into the sump. So next we'll take it up in the air and drain the oil out. A lot of cars nowadays have these belly pans, under trays, so some of them have access points that you can just remove a small panel to gain access to the sump plug, but unfortunately you've got to take the whole thing off on this one. Right, we've got the under tray off now. The sump plug on this one is 21mm. I like to use a single hex socket, it just reduces the chances of slipping. Bit overkill, 1/2 inch drive, but that's what I had to hand. Just make sure you've got your bucket or drain tray or whatever ready. This is quite warm, so it's probably going to come out fairly fast. And being as the sump plug goes straight up in there, it's probably going to go all over my hands, as opposed to the sump plugs that go in the side. Try not to lose the washer. Okay, we'll just leave that to do its thing for a little while. Something to check before you put the sump plug back in. These washers are normally good to go several times. Just make sure it hasn't been crushed or split. But that looks fine. So we'll get that back in now. It's slowed down to a steady drip. Okay, so we'll drop the ramp down now and get some oil in. A funnel here made from a plastic bottle. Make sure the dipstick is pulled up slightly. That allows air out of the engine as the oil's going in and hopefully reduce the risk of it all glugging back up through the filler. So when you go to your motor factor or wherever you get your parts, as I said, make sure you've got your registration number and they'll be able to recommend the correct oil specification for your engine. This one, they suggested that it takes 5.5 litres, which is a little bit annoying because obviously you've got your 5 litre can and you've got to buy another litre on top. You should be able to get 5 litres around about £50, but the price does vary quite a bit depending on which brand you choose. Right, that's 4 litres in there now. I'm just going to go and grab a bit more. Right, this is the other 1.5 litres to make up 5.5. I'd never just glug the whole lot in there. I'm going to go with about 5.2 and then run it up and we'll see where the level's at. Sometimes the recommended amount is actually too much and I don't particularly want to be crawling back underneath and trying to drain out a little bit of oil. It's quite messy. It's just easier to top it up in dribs and drabs. Okay, so that's just over 5 litres. Right, I'll fire it up, let it tick over. You don't need to rev it at all. In fact, it's not really a good idea to rev an engine as soon as it's started, particularly if it's been drained of oil. That's it, the oil pressure light's gone straight out, so that's good. All sounds normal. Right, that should do. Just wanted to let it tick over so the oil can circulate around that filter and fill up all the galleries. We'll let it stand now for 3 or 4 minutes and then get the dipstick out and see what level we're at. Okay, that's stood now for 3 or 4 minutes. Got the dipstick here, giving that a clean. It's fairly clear, you can see maximum mark there, minimum mark there. So hopefully it's somewhere in between. Oh yeah, look, not quite halfway between. So I'll go ahead and top that up a little bit more and just keep checking and repeating the process until you get as close to the maximum mark as you can, preferably without going over it. Having too much oil can cause engine damage, just like having not enough. Okay, so we'll let that stand again now for another 3 or 4 minutes. Let the oil drain down into the sump. Don't need to run it up again because the oil filter and all the galleries have already had oil circulated around them. Right, this has stood for a while now. I've had to top it up a couple of times. And as you can see, it is still below the maximum. That's had about 5.6 litres so far. So it does go to show that it can work the other way as well. The recommended amount wasn't quite enough. So I'm going to carry on and put another 0.1 or so in there, and we'll leave it to stand and check again. Right, let's give this another dip. And it's still down slightly. I'll just make sure that dipstick went in properly. Yeah, that's definitely... Ah, look at that. Perhaps I didn't have it in properly. That's right on the maximum there. So I'm happy with that. That's a good tip. Make sure the dipstick is pushed fully home. So in total, that's taken approximately 5.7 litres, which is a little bit more than they recommended. Still prefer to do it this way in dribs and drabs, just in case it takes less than 5.5. You don't want to put the whole lot in and have to drain it down. Right, this cover can go back on, which just pushes on. That's it. Take it back up in the air and pop the under tray on. I always leave that off till last, just in case I do overfill it and need to drain it down a touch. I noticed when I unbolted the under tray, most of these bolts were quite loose. They're 10mm, like a body bolt self-tapper. And over time, when they go in and out, they do wear out these little nylon fixings. You can get replacements quite easily. Alternatively, I've found a little fix which works quite well actually. Just an old cable tie. Put a bit in there. Might have to leave it until I'm actually putting the bulbs in as well. And then when you do the bolt up, that packs it out nice and tight. You can do them up pretty tight like new. So that's what I'm going to use when I get the under tray back up. Well, that brings us to the end of the job. I'm quite pleased with how everything went. All that's left to do, as I do with most of my jobs, is take it for a run around the block, give it a little road test, and I like to bring it back in, double check, make sure there's no leaks.